Hello, good morning and welcome. Thanks ever so much for taking time out of your day to join us this morning. Today's session will concentrate on Evolution MX's contract sales processing and what you can achieve in terms of recording the sales, recognizing the revenue and reporting against that. Today's session will be recorded, so you'll be sent a link to that recording upon completion. During the session, there is an opportunity for you to pose any relevant questions. Down at the bottom, I think it is on your screens, you've got the question option. By all means, take the opportunity to log any questions that you might want to. I'll not necessarily be able to deal with them during the session today, but we will come back to you afterwards. We'll also be seeking your feedback as well as to how you thought the session went today as well. So we'd appreciate anything you can tell us on that side of things. So Evolution MX is a fully integrated contract management accounting system. For today's session, we're going to be concentrating on the sales side of things. The subject in relation to the costs and the budgeting and the purchase ordering are all subjects of other webinars that we've done. So we do have a recordings library of those. So if you're at all interested in any of those that I'm not going to touch on today, please let us know as part of that feedback. But equally, we very much welcome the opportunity to engage with on a one-to-one basis to go through any specific requirements that you may have. So Evolution MX, let me just bring that up into the main screen. So as I say, this is a fully integrated solution, Evolution MX. Listed down the left-hand side, you can see all of the module areas are potentially available inside the product. The orange solid icons are those that are representing the core system. So they are the out-of-the-box offerings. Everybody's going to get those. So that covers the likes of full job costing, purchasing, invoicing, matching to purchase orders, payment to your suppliers, payment to subcontractors. All of the CIS side of things is catered for, full onboard payroll, as well as full management accounts, including the ability to submit Making Tax Digital submissions to HMRC, and also compile your own trial balance and management reports. So as I say, the whole of the system is covered in other webinars. We're just concentrating today on the sales side of things. Now, sales recording or recognition is variable within inside Evolution MX, and it recognizes the variable nature of what you're conducting in terms of your business. So we're not saying it's a one-size-fits-all. It's up to us together with you to configure the system in the way that you want to recognize your sales. Evolution MX offers the ability to configure exactly how you want to account for sales and on what type of contracts. So no two contracts have to necessarily behave in the same way or be recognized in the same way. So we'll ask you questions about, like, how do you want to bill? Do you raise an invoice or do you get a self-bill? Are you wanting to record the client valuation or certification figure? Do you want to raise sales applications? And if you do, what effect do you want those to have on your accounts? They don't have to have any effect. They can be what we call memorandums. So they are available and reportable against the contract, but they have no accounting impact until such time as you decide to raise the next transaction in the chain. Okay, when probably best illustrated really, if you have a look at through the job costing side of things, I'll just call up a couple of contracts and we'll get an appreciation as to how different the picture could be depending on the type of contract that you've got. So within our contract inquiry, we can select a particular contract. If I just dive into the contract in question, this is the main contract summary, which is looking at all the costs and the budgets and the purchase orders and everything. So the left-hand side of the screen is all about the cost and the budget. We're going to be concentrating for today's session on the right-hand side of the screen, which is all about the sales recognition. So this is reflecting what is happening or due to happen in relation to sales for this particular contract. Now, the wording and the terminology that is being shown here is entirely up to you. So this has been configured to suit this particular type of contract. We are allowing for some memorandum figures to be included there. So this top line, the contract order value, is simply a figure that I record as due as part of the contract setup. Within the information tab on a contract setup, there's a field there for order value. So it's a straightforward, you put the figure in there. That's the ultimate revenue you expect to recognize or hope to recognize against this particular contract. And that can be included in your summary view. So there's no postings in relation to that particular element. And other fields as well that you saw there could have been included on that screen as well. If you wanted to have the original prime cost or overhead value or anything like that, those sort of figures could be included also. The other figures are coming from transactions that have been posted in relation to this particular contract. So we've got a combination of things like applications. As I say, we can configure the application process to do whatever you want it to do. Its figure can certainly be included quite easily on the contract summary as it's doing now, but you also decide on any implications that may have within the system. And majority, we find, tend to say that we'd like the application to be reportable, but we don't want to have an impact on our turnover or our debtors. But it's entirely up to you whether it does or it doesn't. We've got other things being recognized there as well, the certificate value or the valuation entry. So in the absence of any invoice, because we're not saying you have to put an invoice against a contract, some people think they do have to, just to be able to recognize the tax point, for example. But we can move the tax point to the point at which cash is received. So there's not necessarily any need to raise an invoice if all you're doing that for is to create a tax point, because we can recognize that the client provides a self-bill. You just want to record the certificate or the valuation entry. Okay, other fields can be recognized there, and calculations. So we've got a profit calculation. It's up to you what that profit calculation is made in conjunction with, whether it is just looking at the certified figure away from the costs, or whether it includes any application figures. Entirely up to you. It's just a memorandum indication, really, as far as this particular contract is concerned. If I use the next button at the bottom, we'll be able to skip to the next contract, and you can see the picture here is quite different. So we're saying for this particular type of contract, there are no applications or valuations involved. It is still going to record that hopefully recognized ultimate revenue figure, but it's purely going to rely upon invoices, maybe a bit of retention, credit notes, and cash received. So you can see that the picture can be quite different between different types of contract. You're not limited to only two. You can have as many different methodologies and workflow streams as you wish. And then when you set the contract up, you just say what kind of contract that particular contract is going to adhere to. Okay, so to get transactions to appear against the contract, let's go into my sales menu, and I'm going to use the sales invoicing heading. Now, this isn't purely for invoicing. This is a global heading we use, and anything within here is used to not only create a posting against the contract, but also to create a document that can be sent out to the client. So I'm going to use the option initially for a contract application. Okay, and that's going to allow me to put an application against that first contract that we just saw. So make the posting, call up your contract, 1034. It knows who the customer is already, so that's going to allow me to recognize that, but you could have a different customer on the same contract, so the system will allow for that equally. Over on the reference, we can put in whatever it is we want to put as a reference, maybe the month and the year. That's then going to allow me to construct the content of the application using the values button at the bottom, where I can either free type here or copy and paste from something that I want to use as a relevant description against what I'm going to be raising the application against, or I can use a paragraph library which has a number of different shortcuts in there. So, for example, I could have abbreviations which reflect a particular paragraph that I might want to use on occasions. Now, this particular application has been set up as a cumulative basis. So what you're seeing as the figures in the center of the screen are the previously raised figures in relation to application. So 16 grand is what is already there. If I then in the goods section just put in either the new cumulative, so if I put in 50 grand, the system will recognize that that is going to be a movement of 34 grand. I could, if you prefer, put the 34 grand in over on the right-hand side, and it could attribute towards the new cumulative. Now, discount has been allowed for entry on this particular application, although there's no automatic calculation. Now, you can set a discount percentage against the contract, and the system can automatically suggest that to you, or you can just allow for the manual input. As no calculations being made at the moment, what this is actually going to do is going to try and refund the discount because it's not recognized as an inbuilt calculation. So I can just protect that if I want to and say it's still applicable at this point. Okay, that's really all I need to do. I'm recording the headline figure, really, of the application. If, as part of that document you want to send to a client, you want to include a breakdown of that, you can use the document button here, which will open up a window allowing you to drag and drop something else that could be a more detailed breakdown, an Excel file, for example. So simply drag and drop into that window anything else that you want to have as a supplementary document that could be of use or interest or requirement to the particular customer. As it is, I can just preview the document we've got here. When you preview, you could have a choice of layouts of the document. I've got a choice here, so it's asking me which one to use. If you've only got the one default, as we'll see with invoicing, then it won't prompt you. It'll just display the record as you've got it. So here is an application document. So it's the front sheet really we're talking about here with the layout agreed with us during the implementation for you. It can include whatever terminology you want. So you can sort of see I didn't actually allow for retention on that application, so I therefore may not want this line to appear on my document, but it's entirely up to you whether it does or it doesn't. This is just purely an example of what could be achieved, and your logo can easily be inserted onto that. So as a preview document, that could be something that you use for approval basis, because you could print it from here, or you could go into the Adobe and you could email it to somebody just to say, I'm about to raise this application for the client. Is that okay? That won't have had any effect because it will be in draft mode as it stands at the moment. Okay, so if I just just to save that, it's going to save it away. Whilst we're in here, we'll just do an invoice or two as well. So if I do a contract invoice entry, I'll use the other contract that we saw when we were looking at the preview on the contract inquiries earlier. So 1035 this time, different customer, allows us to put in a reference for that. Now this invoice is going to be made up of values in the same way as we saw before. It could be made up through products. So if you have got a product file, you could be using multiple lines reflecting different products or services that you've set up as codes within your product library. But equally, you can use values. And in the same ways we saw before, you've got access to that same list of shortcuts or abbreviations. Now, you'll notice here that there is only one figure for entry or display. So we're not working on a cumulative basis here on this type of invoice. We're saying it is purely going to be on a movement basis. So the goods figure that we've got at that point will allow us to just put in the overriding figure. So we'll just say it's 1,000. Okay, there is an automatic retention calculation because a retention percentage was set up on the contract. And also we said that this type of transaction, i.e. an invoice, does involve retention. But conversely, you'll see it doesn't include discount. So this is the way you can configure the system to make presented to you the information that's relevant to you for this particular type of transaction. So invoicing here, no discount, but retention is applicable, and VAT is going to be calculated similarly. So I could enter one line that way. If I put in another line with another entry, okay, we can have similar calculations. Anything highlighted in blue is just a suggested calculation. You can override that if you want to. The system just working upon what you've set as the defaults for that particular contract. So we've got now a two-line invoice building up at this point. We can preview, and we'll see there's no choice this time of layout. So we've just got the one version of invoice, and that's going to show you a different document in line with this particular transaction. So the two lines that are being shown there, maybe with VAT calculations, maybe an indication of retention as well on there, but also your company logo can be included. Okay, I'll also show you another way of doing an invoice. Now, with Evolution MX, even though we've said there's an invoice capability on this particular contract, we can actually have a second type of invoice capability. And it would be up to you what that might represent. It could be a cumulative invoice, for example, as opposed to a movement invoice. It could be an invoice that includes or doesn't include retention in the opposite way to what the invoice one did. So you've got two different ways of doing an invoice on the same contract. Mine is actually set up for doing a quotation. So you could use this for quotations or pro formas, if you like, because I can indicate that although we're going through an invoice process, the result will not result in a turnover or a debtors update. It can just be memorandum in the same ways we talked about with the applications. So for this one, if I go in through I'm going to say it's 1035, the reference, whatever that might be. Saying OK, we can go down to our values. Okay, again, I can use my abbreviation lines, put in the figure, let's just say it's 12 grand. You'll see here on this invoice 2, there is no discount or no retention. So this could be a way of you saying, I'm going to produce an invoice to the customer, but I don't want them to know that we may offer retention, for example. So you can stop that being necessarily applicable. Now, on this one, I'm also going to allow what we call sales analysis, which is a way of you being able to record and have visible against your costs what you're actually accounting for in terms of revenue. Now, this is an optional part of your sales process if you want to use it. So what we could be doing there is we could say the 12 grand is going to be recognized as revenue, albeit memorandum in this case, but I'm going to go into the analysis and say, well, what's that made up from? So I could put this maybe against an element of costs to say 5 grand relates to the material side of things, a particular type of material maybe. I could go further than that and say, I'm going to break that down and have the remaining 7 grand going a different cost head. So that means that you're able to see the 12 grand as revenue on the right-hand side of the screen, but you can also see how it applies against the costs that you've got on the left-hand side of the screen. I'll try and draw your attention to that when we come back into looking at the contract inquiry in a second. Okay, so that's quite happy with that. If we just say OK, and we're OK on that one, we could preview that and we could just have a look at it as a different type of document if you wanted to. Okay, so everything we've produced so far in terms of the application and the 2 invoices are draft documents. So as we saw, we could preview those, we could send them out to somebody for their approval before we confirm them. And it could be a process now that you do at the end of the day or periodically through the time, you go in and print the sales documents, in which case it can dispatch all documents to all customers of all types in one process. You have the option of using modified documents. So that means that something that was produced in draft mode is amendable because maybe the approval says, can you change this? Can you change that? So you can amend things that you have already prepared through the process that we've just seen. But if I go into print sales docs, we'll be able to see what's waiting to be sent through the different headings. So we've got our application at the top there, which was raised today. I can just say, I want to print that. That's going to go off. So that will allow us to send it out. This customer has already been indicated with their email address for dispatch. So it's automatically going to send that out for me that way. Okay, so that's that done. And then the invoice, it will include not only mine, but there's also a couple of other ones there as well. So you can do them all together. You don't have to do them on a one-for-one basis. We can say, let's print all of those out. This will now recognize that actually only 2 of them were sent to email. One was actually still requiring a hard copy. So you've got the option of being able to set that on a customer by customer basis. Okay, we'll also then be able to recognize, if you remember, my invoice type 2 was set to be a quotation. So it's going to recognize that as being able to be sent out. So I can dispatch that in a similar way. And I've got the choice here as to whether it's going to be what I call a quotation or maybe an order acknowledgement. So you could have the same process recognized as 2 different documents. Okay, so that's our invoices and applications created and dispatched. If we return to the contract inquiry, we'll be able to see what's been happening there. So on my contract 1035, I've now got an impact on the right-hand side of the system. So the invoices to date has risen from the figure it was previously. That may or may not include the invoice type 2. Because they are different types of transactions, you can choose to include them or not, as the case may be on the right-hand side of the screen. So it would be your choice as to how. In my case, the second invoice isn't included over on the right-hand side. But remember, I put in sales analysis for it. So what you're able to see there is on the right-hand side of the screen, if we just go to the cost side, we can see we've got a sales figure of the 12 grand that I just put in. There was another 150 sitting there already. So we could actually say that when we were raising our sales, we were accounting for them and wanting to just recognize that we have invoiced out for 7 grand's worth of that element and 5 grand's worth of that element. So that can be a useful additional reporting tool to be able to see what's been going on. Okay, so as it is, we've got the invoice being shown there. If we go to the sales, then we'll be able to see what's been going on. So we've got the general invoice, which was invoice type 1, and we've got the quotation, which was invoice type 2. And any one of those you could drill into to see what different transactions have gone under that heading. So there we'll be including the 20th of June entry that you just saw me create. And there's the entries that we've created. Along with that, you would have retained for you would be the document of the invoice image that's been recorded. Okay, so that's document management kicking in at that point. Anything you create as a document, you can not only email out at source, but you also have it retained against the transaction within inside Evolution MX. And that's going to be included within your data backup. And it's going to be accessible from wherever that had an impact. So I'll be able to get to it as I'm doing here from the contract inquiry, but I could also get it from the customer inquiry. And if it had been a ledger entry, I'd be able to get to it through the nominal ledger as well. Okay, on the other contract that we were working on, if we just come out here, we can go in through 1034 on the summary there. we'll be able to see that my application figure has risen cumulatively now to 50,000. My certified hasn't changed. That was still the 12,000 it was when we first looked at this contract, but we can now impact that in a different way from what we've seen so far. So to record certified values or client valuations, whatever you choose to call them, we'll go through a slightly different process. So we'll still go in through the sales side of things, but rather than going in through sales invoicing, because we don't actually need to create a document, we'll just go through the postings option. And that's going to allow us to enter a particular type of transaction. Now, it's up to you whether you have a menu like this, which is listing every single type of transaction you could ever post, and you can select it from the menu appropriately, or you can just go into the single post transactions option, which will give you an option to select what type of transaction it may be. So your choice really as to how you might work this. So I can do either. I'll go in through valuation, which is what we're referring to here as my certificate. Okay, and for contract 1034, again, it knows who the customer is. We can be recording whatever reference you might want there. Again, it's cumulative, so you can see there's that 12,000 that we saw on the contract inquiry for previous valuations that have been put in. We can now put in the new cumulative. So against the goods value, I can put in my 40 grand. Again, no automatic calculations, but it's allowing me to recognize discount and retention. I might want to protect that. If you don't put it in now, then it will be basically, it will charge it back and include it on the transaction. So you'll have that reflecting through your accounts. You could also use that from an invoicing perspective, for example, to invoice out the remaining retention. Now on here, I can attempt to just finish off, but you'll see there's a date due, because on this particular type of transaction, I've said I want to be able to put in a due date. So we've got the client valuation. We're going to expect the cash maybe in another 7 days. So we can maybe record that. And then that allows us to be able to report upon certificates that are due for receipt of cash by whatever date you specified. Okay, so I'll just put that in there and okay to that. That's all it really requires at that point. Say okay again, and the update will take place. Okay, so that's a ledger update. No creation of a document, as I say, because I don't want one created. I've gone in through a ledger posting option to do that. Okay, what I'll also do here is I'll go in and I'll post some cash. Now, interestingly, we've got post receipt and post receipt type 2. In the same way as we had 2 ways of posting an invoice, we can have 2 ways of recognizing cash. And that could be important because we may choose for the tax point to be applicable to only one kind of cash. In other words, the cash that's received against a valuation. A deposit, for example, from a client, you may want to record as cash, but you don't want it to affect a tax point. So you can have 2 ways of recognizing on the contract, as in a similar way that we saw the different types of invoicing we had. So I'm going to use a type 2, which does reflect the tax point, because I'm not having to raise an invoice. I'm going to wait until I get the cash before the VAT is accounted for, if there is any. Okay, so going in here, I'll go into the same contract we saw before, 1034, same customer, key in whatever references might be of relevance to me, and then the total value of the receipt. So I'll put in just 10,000 at that point. Okay, the VAT is going to be automatically calculated. Say okay. Now there's a couple of extra things I've got to do here because of the configuration of this particular type of transaction. Firstly, I need to go into the VATable because it needs to know, well, what VAT rates are we using for this, because it is a tax point transaction at this point. So I just need to go into the VATable. I can just accept the default that's been set, recognizing that all 10 grand is going to be applied at the standard rate. You can, of course, have different rates of VAT. We do account also for the reverse charge, obviously, which has become more relevant in recent months and years. So that's an option for you to be able to use. So, and it allows you also to split. So if not all 10 grand was on the same basis, you could split it if you wanted to, but I'll just accept it all on that basis. So it all goes in a standard rate. I've also got the option for matching, and it is only an option. So we're not saying you have to. What we're going to do here is be able to say that this cash was received in relation to valuation X, for example. You don't have to do that because it's not always possible or practical to do that. Some systems will insist that you do, and every transaction has to be matched against another. But we're saying, well, allow it if you want, but if you can't, then don't. So I'll say here, well, I can, so I'm going to match it, but I'm only matching the 10 grand that we just put in rather than the outstanding 28. So that's a useful additional option for you to be able to use. So if I say OK to that and OK again, we'll now affect that posting and update it through to the ledgers. Looking back then at our contract inquiry, I'll be able to drill into contract 1034. Over on the right-hand side, then we can see that the certified value has jumped up to 40 grand as a result of me doing the valuation entry. And we've also got the cash received has jumped as well. 20 grand is included there. The profit can then be similarly affected. As I said before, you choose what that profit is in relation to. We've also got a clearer indication there on the retention. So whilst the retention is kind of included in the maths above, we've got an emboldened line there just to say, well, by the way, your retention of 600 quid is due on the 31st of December. So when you're scanning through your contracts, you can easily see that kind of information. The sales transactions then that are going to be visible to us, we can then against the payment or the receipt, be able to see what we've just been posting. So if we looked at the invoice I've just done for the top one, that one, we can see not only the entries, but we also get the match analysis, which allows us to see at the bottom of the screen that that was matched against valuation reference CR2. We also get the reverse true as well. So if we looked at the certificate entry, we'd be able to drill into the particular certificate we did, the match analysis will then say, well, that certificate is matched by receipt number 2. So you get that two-way matching recognition. It's all full audit of everything that's happened. Okay, so that's the processing of how you would get sales recognized against your contracts. Again, I can't stress enough that it is configurable, and we would take considerable time with yourselves to make sure that we were understanding what your sales processes needed to be and how they differ maybe from one contract to another. When it comes to investigating or reporting upon that information, we can see how the contract inquiry is available to us. So we can pick and choose the contract we want to have a look at, and we can delve into the detail to look at whatever we want on a particular contract. But looking at overall, you can do that through the use of either the standard reports, which we provide to you, but we've also got analytics available as well on a contract, on a sales basis throughout the system. Analytics is basically whatever you want it to be. It's user-defined reporting. This is the subject of separate webinars, so we will be able to look at that with you in more detail. We can send you a link to something which would explain this in a lot more detail. But it means that you can be providing your own list of reports to maybe look into information, not necessarily only on a sale. We could use a contract performance example to go in and see how all our jobs are doing, because this is enabling me to see a list of jobs and my choice of fields across the top, some of which can be related to the sales, some of which are related to the costs. I can use my field selector to pick and choose what I want. So you can pick up and choose exactly what you want. Do you want to see the sales? Do you want to see the value of certificates, retentions, discounts? All those sort of things can all be included or not, as the case may be, on this particular report. You can drag and drop columns around as well. So if you want to reorganize how something shows, you can do so. You can also use conditional formatting. So what we're doing here is we're highlighting in a pale green color, something where the profit margin's been considered and where that's greater than 0. So in other words, green is the jobs that are making me money. Not too many of them, unfortunately, but at least you're getting that early indication. So you can bring in traffic light style reporting to your displays. Further down, red could be indicating a job over budget, orange could be nearly over budget. So you get that kind of information available in the format that you want, including any indications of retention due dates and retention and so forth. So it could be a report which highlights or zooms in purely on retention, rather than it being something looked at overall contract performance, because you could save this version of events under a different name and say it's my retention report. From here, if you wanted to, you could also drill into the detail. So you can drill down within a particular contract and go down into more detail, representing the different costs that you've got, and also further down into individual cost postings. So that's analytics in a nutshell, allowing you to get into the detail that you know is there. You just want it displayed in the way that you want it to. Another aspect of analytics could be to look at a dashboard view. Now, initially, this is going to show me a contract dashboard, which is considering all contracts. So the figures you see are quite lumpy. They are to do with all contracts. You've chosen what you're going to have presented here, whether it's looking at cost, budget, orders, retentions, whatever it may be. In fact, my bottom right field there, or right tile that I've configured, is saying that overall you've got 12 retentions due within the next 30 days, because you can set parameters on that. And if you click on that, it will take you down and show you where those retentions sit. Okay, we've got 11 being shown here, oddly, even though this tile said 12, because we've got this grouped by the customer contract. So there could have been 2 transactions on the same contract that both involve retention. It's grouped them together here. So this is just a good way of being able to interrogate and chase up on those retentions that would perhaps otherwise go unnoticed. So you've got that ability to drill in that way. Another way could be to go in through my contract list. In fact, I can do it from here. So rather than looking at all contracts, I could say, here's my contract list, and I want to have a look specifically at contract 1034, for example. So that now draws me up a very similar dashboard to what we saw before. It is different because it's under a different menu item. All things appear the same, other than, of course, it's filtering it now and saying, well, this is your dashboard purely for contract 1034. And what we can see instead of the number of retentions, we can see a tile at the bottom, which is showing you the value of the retention. So there's 600 quid in retention for this particular contract. Click onto that and it'll show you the transactions that were maybe reflecting that. So each of these tiles is effectively a mini report that you can configure and have displaying you the information that you want to use. Okay, also, just out of interest, on a contract dashboard, you could get access to the contract documents. So we saw how documents were being created through the sales process. This is now going to be storing them all underneath a heading there for sales invoice. So within there, we can see there's the application that we raised on this particular contract. It knows which contract it was against. It's just an alternative way of getting in and seeing those documentary evidences. Also on here would be other things that have already happened elsewhere in the system, things like purchase orders being raised against that contract, payment certificates to subcontractors. But equally, you could have this available as a repository for any other types of documents. So if you are collecting correspondence from a customer, for example, you could be going and just dragging and dropping information relating to other documents that's going to be relevant to being stored on the system. So here I can just say, okay, I've got a random PDF file there. Where am I going to put it? I've got a selection of headings. You can choose what these headings are. Maybe put it in something called photos. And then that creates another entry into the document management for that particular contract. So it's visible now to anybody who has access to it. It's not just a link to that document, it's actually copied it into the system. So it's now part of your Evolution MX data. Okay, and the beauty of the analytics and dashboards is that they can be accessed from anywhere, really. They're on any device. So we could be talking about an iPad or a Galaxy tablet device without the need for a full Evolution MX license. It's just what we call a framework license, which allows you to access the data. You're not expected or allowed to do anything in terms of input, but the analytics and dashboards could be a useful way of providing information to those who haven't got a handle on putting the transactions in, but need to see the information real time rather than having to rely on somebody else to provide it. Okay, that was our quick run through of the contract sales process for Evolution MX. I do hope you found something of use and interest in there, but please do let us know if there's anything else that you'd like to see either in more detail about today's session or of any other areas of Evolution MX. And so you will be getting a follow-up email just to invite you to provide us with some feedback. So I'd like to thank you very much for attending today and wish you a very good morning. Thanks very much. Bye now.